The dream of landing a fortune by backing a winning horse gets the better of four scheming friends in our comedy film, The Longshot, in 10 minutes. Now on to the news with Chris Lowe.
Health has moved to the top of the election agenda for the first time in the campaign. The Labour leader Neil Kinnock has again claimed that the Conservatives want to privatise and fracture the NHS. The Conservatives have accused Labour of making spending promises in their manifesto which they could not possibly keep.
Robin Cook opened up the second front on health by publishing what he said was a dossier of letters from patients who had been forced to go private. Labour said it was evidence that the NHS was being privatised and people weren't receiving the care they were entitled to.
These writers were all forced to go private by the present state of the NHS. They all went private whilst being angry at being faced with having to make that choice.
Mr Cook said he stood by a comment he made earlier that Labour intended to implement its manifesto pledges during the next Parliament. The Conservatives had called that a gaffe and reopened their charge that Labour hadn't costed their manifesto because it was so expensive.
12,375 words, but containing pledges that would require the expenditure of £38 billion of taxpayers' money, and that's £3 million a word.
Neil Kinnock said the Conservative figures were a fantastic exaggeration. Labour say the Tories are running scared because they know the election is slipping away from them.
And Lance Price joins me now. Lance, do you sense that Labour feel under some pressure over health, which is after all supposed to be their strongest card?
No, I think they're hoping that health will work for them, and it's interesting that they have decided to produce it today. I think that's probably indicative of the fact that they get a sense that the Conservatives are beginning to bite back a bit after a rather lacklustre start to their campaign last week. So Labour have brought forward health, which is, as you say, one of their big issues and one where they feel it will always work for them. The Tories obviously contest that, but that's certainly Labour's impression on the health issue.
You mentioned the Conservatives fighting back a bit. Do you see signs of these new tactics we've been hearing about?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, it is clear from the discussions that they were having amongst themselves over the weekend that they are now focusing far more on issues which they think will be of importance to the ordinary man in the street rather than those who are relatively well off in national terms. So partly they've been doing that over the whole question of leadership this morning in foreign affairs, but also now targeting on the cost of the programme, which they say is something which everyone will have to bear. Of course, Labour respond to that by saying they've gone far further than any opposition party has done in the past in costing their programme.
Lance Price, thank you very much. The other news, nuclear experts in Russia are investigating this morning's radiation leak from a reactor near St. Petersburg. Officials at the plant say there's been no increase in background radiation and local residents should not be concerned.
The incident at the Sosnovy Bor nuclear power station occurred in the early hours of this morning, filling the machine room with radioactive iodine, some of which leaked into the atmosphere. Emissions were 5 to 6 times above the permissible level, not enough, according to officials, to harm the population. It was the same kind of reactor that exploded at Chernobyl in 1986, causing the world's worst nuclear accident. The cause of today's incident hasn't been established, but officials say a small emission of radioactive steam occurred after a sudden drop in pressure in one of the tubes where water is heated by nuclear fuel rods.
Britain's biggest building society, the Halifax, has reported a small increase in profits despite the downturn in the housing market. The society also said it's had to treble its bad debt provisions. The Halifax's chief executive says the best way to revive the housing market is to cut interest rates. The Chief Constable of Strathclyde, Leslie Sharp, has been warned that racist remarks he made at a cricket club dinner were unacceptable. Mr Sharp was given the warning at a special meeting of Strathclyde Council's Police and Fire Committee. Councillors were told that Mr Sharp had apologised unreservedly and given an assurance that he supported the Council's anti-racist policy. The latest mission of America's space shuttle programme has been launched with a crew including a British-born scientist and the first Belgian citizen to go into space. Atlantis took off this afternoon on an 8-day mission to study the Earth's atmosphere in the hope of finding solutions to environmental problems like ozone depletion. The England cricket captain Graham Gooch and his teammate Ian Botham have walked out of an official World Cup dinner in Melbourne in protest at anti-royal jokes. The pair, who were among 1,800 guests, were said to be upset at a drag artist's impersonation of the Queen. One of the England management team said the dinner was meant to be a great occasion on the eve of the World Cup final, but had been let down by this one performer. And that's it. The next news is the 6 o'clock news on BBC One.
Hello, well the wind in Australia for the cricket should be a light northerly. Here we've got a fairly strong northerly. It'll carry on throughout tonight and into tomorrow. Well, it's starting to go around to the northwest up here in western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Maybe a slightly warmer direction, but I think it's more likely to herald a bit more cloud and rain. But for most of us, a fairly dry night. The odd shower still coming across East Anglia and into Kent maybe. But this area here will certainly expand, and I think by dawn most of Scotland and even Northern Ireland will see some rain, even some snow on the hills. But inland, temperatures dropping to 0 here and there, particularly around the eastern part of Wales and down the eastern side of Scotland to start with, and a pretty cold night elsewhere as well. So this is how it starts. Wet up here, as you know, with some sleet, snow and rain. Dry elsewhere, but it will wet later on in the day.
This is BBC Two in the southeast.
Good afternoon from Newsroom Southeast. 20 people have been arrested after a violent demonstration by Kurds in central London. 1 police officer and 4 protesters were injured.
Organisers of the Kurdish demonstration say it was spontaneous. Police say that the protesters, some armed with pickaxe handles and hammers, tried to get into the embassy at around 11 o'clock this morning. One senior policeman said his officers were shocked by the ferocity of the attack and had to call in extra support to keep the crowd at bay. But eyewitnesses say that the police were very heavy-handed with the crowd, which included dozens of women and children. One demonstrator suffered serious head injuries and was taken to hospital by air ambulance. 1 police officer was also hurt.
Families of those killed in the Marchioness riverboat tragedy are calling for an independent inquiry after discovering that half the victims had their hands cut off in post-mortem examinations. 51 people died in the accident on the Thames 3 years ago. Members of the Marchioness Action Group say they're not satisfied with official explanations that fingerprints were needed for identification purposes.
Were they conducting scientific experiments? Were they conducting research? We don't know those answers at the moment, and that is why we're calling for an independent investigation to tell us what exactly took place, why it took place, and not being fobbed off from one authority to the next authority.
Chelsea Football Club has been granted a breathing space in the dispute over the purchase of their ground. The club had been told to pay their landlords £23 million for Stamford Bridge by this Thursday or risk being evicted. Today, the appeal court granted them an estimated 2 to 3 weeks extra to settle their differences. British wives of American servicemen stationed at Upper Hayford in Oxfordshire are at the appeal court today fighting for exemption from the poll tax. 13 women from the base who kept dual nationality claim they shouldn't pay because of their unique status. In tonight's Newsroom Southeast, there'll be an election campaign report on the main party's attitude to transport in the region. And following the programme, Guy Mitchellmore will be taking your calls on BBC Local Radio and putting your election questions to transport experts. The telephone number to call after 7 p.m. is 081 953 4444. That's between 7 and 8 o'clock tonight. That's all from us. Now look at the weather from Rob McElwee.
Hello again. Well, all these blue blobs are showers coming in off the North Sea across East Anglia, the home counties, almost reaching the Salisbury Plain. And they'll continue throughout the afternoon, this pretty stiff wind, even into the night I think they will, but they'll tend to die back towards the eastern coast and keep temperatures no lower than about 2 degrees. So a fairly bright start. Later on in the night, as I say, the showers disappearing, a bright start tomorrow morning. We might even reach double figures, and the wind that much lighter, so it'll feel rather a pleasant day, but it will cloud over in the afternoon, and this rain will start to sweep down by evening.
BBC Two, playing the game.
What people are looking for when they gamble is something which has that element of risk and danger, but without actually putting their own physical well-being into jeopardy.
BBC Two, serving the best in sport, saving the penalties, taking the wickets. On the Line is there to report.
Let's go! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
BBC Two, behind the scenes.
We go out and we do the business.
Rugby League, Rugby Union, 2 teams, 1 town. A sporting triumph on 2.
Now on to how, or perhaps how not, to land a fortune on a winning horse in this afternoon's film, The Long Shot.